In a recent television interview, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, described things like borders and global order as niceties. The U.S. government is acting with disdain for international law. The White House imposed a trade blockade against Venezuela, forcibly seized its president from his residence, coerced allies here in North America and Europe. CGTN's Jim Spellman is in our newsroom and has more details for us. Jim, the Trump administration is not hiding its intention to expand not only its influence, but also its territory.
Yeah, and after the U.S. military action against Venezuela, many analysts see a return to the so-called Monroe Doctrine, a U.S. foreign policy principle dating back to the early 1800s that argues the U.S. should essentially control the Western Hemisphere. Some are calling the Trump administration's version of this the Monroe Doctrine.
This is the Western Hemisphere. This is where we live, and we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be a base of operation for adversaries, competitors, and rivals of the United States.
The tools the U.S. has used include strongman tactics like the military incursion into Venezuela and economic pressure, including the seizing of oil tankers and threats of tariffs. The Trump administration seems to be seeking an expansion of U.S. power that includes control over the internal affairs of other countries and open-ended access to oil and minerals. Trump suggests other countries in Latin America could be targeted, including Colombia, Mexico, and Cuba, while also focusing on countries outside the Americas, including Iran and Greenland. Trump's desire to take over Greenland and risk shattering the NATO alliance would have been almost unthinkable before his presidency. He seems to have backed off for the moment, but Trump's unpredictability and those U.S. military actions in Venezuela has convinced other countries to take Trump's threats seriously. Anand?
Jim, the United States Senator Bernie Sanders, he's a Democrat senator, he called the administration's policy rather, as quote-unquote old-fashioned imperialism. How is that reaction, how is that statement being met with in the United States?
Well, I think first off, there's a lot of confusion in part because of the mixed messages from the Trump administration about the goals of these various actions. With Venezuela, the administration spent months citing drug trafficking as the primary motive of U.S. intervention, but almost immediately after the military incursion, they stopped talking about drugs. With Greenland, Trump cites national security concerns, but treaties and laws dating back to the 1950s give the U.S. military wide access to Greenland. So some analysts here see this instead as a way for Trump to make a permanent mark by expanding the U.S. footprint, moves that will go down in history and can't be easily reversed, even while facing some pushback from within his MAGA base from those who oppose military and foreign interventions. Anand?
That was CGTN's Jim Spellman reporting there. Well, to talk more about United States foreign policy, we welcome Professor Jeffrey Sachs. He is the director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. Jeffrey, great to see you.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
Jeffrey, in his first year of the second term, President Trump has pursued a very aggressive foreign policy. In fact, I think it might be more apt to call it a war policy rather than a foreign policy, but it has included attacks on sovereign nations, the arming of an ally, Israel, which is committing what a UN panel says is a genocide in Gaza. There have been threats against sovereign territory belonging to allies. We saw the seizure of a foreign leader, Nicolas Maduro, the seizure of oil tankers as well. President Trump says this is all about United States national security. How do you see it?
Nothing that has been done has improved U.S. national security, that's for sure. We are less secure today than we were certainly when Trump's second term began. And in fact, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists just unveiled the updated doomsday clock, which measures worldwide insecurity. They moved the second hand of the clock 4 seconds towards midnight, saying that we are now, as a world, only 85 seconds to nuclear Armageddon, essentially. They said the world has become a lot more dangerous during the past year. I think we have to say that this is the case. The United States bombed 7 countries by one reliable count. Trump threatens countries every day. He's threatening a war, renewed, expanded war in the Middle East with what could be imminently an attack on Iran, since there's a major carrier task force that Trump is boasting is there to attack Iran. There still is lawlessness in the U.S. approach in Venezuela, a military naval quarantine against all international rules. And I think we should add the fact that the Trump administration pulled out of 31 UN organizations. Trump is making a direct assault on the UN Charter and on the UN-based system, basically to say, we'll do what we want. The only thing that constrains me is my mind, he said, my own morality. This is an extraordinarily dangerous position. It's a delusional one when any leader or any country says, we're not bound by international law, we're not bound by the UN Charter. So this does not make America more secure in any way. It makes it less secure, but sadly, it makes the whole world less secure.
That threat against Iran, it intensified this week with the president saying that time is running out for Iran unless there is a nuclear deal. And by nuclear deal, he means that Iran cannot be involved in any kind of nuclear program whatsoever. It has to give up its entire nuclear program. Part of that deal, according to media reports in the United States, is also that Iran restricts the range of its missiles, and that range must fall well short of Israel. With all these conditions being placed on Iran, what is there to negotiate?
I don't think that Iran will accept these conditions, and that could lead to war, and the war would be a disaster, obviously, for Iran, but I think for the whole region and possibly for the whole world. So this is very alarming. Who does Mr. Trump think he is? That he can make every demand he wants on any part of the world? Well, that's the behavior right now, but it is not conducive to solutions or to peace. What's happened in Iran, as his own Treasury Secretary basically chortled with delight last week, is that the U.S. has been using what they call maximal pressure to destroy the Iranian economy. And this is rather shocking. In other words, the U.S. has been at war with Iran, but using economic and financial means mostly, not military means primarily, though the United States, of course, did bomb Iran last June, and the CIA and Mossad together commit assassinations and other forms of violence inside Iran. But I doubt that the Iranians are going to surrender to Emperor Donald, but we'll see.
If, Jeffrey, there is an attack on Iran, what are the broader implications for the region?
Iran is a major country, obviously. It is not a world great power, but it is a regional power. It's 90 million people. It has hypersonic missiles. It has important allies in the region and internationally. It is not a pushover. It's not Venezuela in America's backyard. It's in a completely explosive region of the world. And so if Trump starts an attack on Iran, it could easily spread to a regional war.
And turning to Venezuela, what do you think was the point of that attack on Venezuela and seizing the president, Nicolas Maduro? And before that, of course, the United States had been carrying out a campaign of attacks on boats off the coastline of Venezuela, alleging that these boats were shipping drugs to the United States. No evidence was provided of that. But Maduro is now in a U.S. prison, so is his wife, but his entire government remains in place. So what was the point of it all?
The United States government, the deep state, the CIA in particular, has been trying to overthrow left-wing government in Venezuela at least back to 2002. In 2002, there was a coup attempt against the then president, Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez. It took him out of office for one day. The CIA and the U.S. government expressed delight, but Chavez was powerful enough to claw his way back to power after having been subjected to this attempted coup, and he then continued his presidency. Since then, and especially after Venezuela confirmed massive oil reserves, and the United States government confirmed the scale of those reserves from 2007 onward, the U.S. in one way or another has been itching to capture those reserves, to overthrow the government, to get its leading companies, especially ExxonMobil, together with Chevron, into Venezuela and earning a lot of money. So throughout the 2010s, there was, again, a maximum pressure campaign. There was an attempted color revolution, in my view, in 2014 in Venezuela. By that, I mean the United States brought people out onto the streets. It didn't work. In 2017, Trump put the squeeze on financially, trying to basically break the Venezuelan state oil company. He succeeded to a significant extent in crushing the production of Venezuela. That put the economy into startling collapse between 2016 and 2020, perhaps a decline of as much as 60 to 70% in per capita income, something you would almost never see in a peacetime economy. It led to mass refugees. Trump at one point, what should have been seen as an absurdity, but what was taken seriously by all the U.S. vassal states around the world, declared a different president in Venezuela, Juan Guaido, who was a legislator. And Washington just came up with the idea, we'll call him president. We'll confiscate Venezuela's reserves. We'll give the reserves to Mr. Guaido. It's a comic book approach, but they tried it. It ended up fizzling out. But it shows that the war against Venezuela, the attempt to overthrow a left of center, left wing government has been underway for nearly a quarter century now. And Trump pulled the trigger and kidnapped a president and purports to run the country now, something I don't think is true. But we're still in the midst of a violent U.S. regime change operation.
You know, all that we are talking about right now was the dominant topic of conversation at that world gathering in Davos, Switzerland, the World Economic Forum. That's a gathering of the ultra-wealthy, corporate leaders, political leaders, journalists as well. Sometimes they're all the same people. But one of the speeches at this year's Davos gathering was one made by the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, in which he talked of the fact that the world is now in the midst of what he called a rupture. That was a break in the way the global order used to run. The old order is that was in place since World War II is now over. Do you see the world in some kind of a transition right now? Are we at some kind of inflection point? And how will the United States respond to that? I mean, it's not going to just give up its dominant position very easily, is it?
We are definitely in a broad historical transformation from a Western-dominated world, which lasted about 250 years, in which the European imperial powers in the 18th and 19th century and the United States in the second half of the 20th century purported to run the show for the whole world. And that world is over because we've already reached multipolarity. China is a superpower. It is an economic superpower. Russia is a superpower. India is becoming a superpower. So we're already in a multipolar world. Not in Donald Trump's head, though. In Donald Trump's head and in the machinations and intentions of the CIA and the U.S. deep state, they're intent on keeping control. They can't, but they're intent on it. And so there's a collision with reality that is playing out in different regions of the world. In Latin America, where more and more countries have China as the main trading partner. In the Middle East, where we have turmoil to an important extent, also created by the U.S. ally, by Israel, and in Asia, where, of course, most Asian countries, say in Southeast Asia, have China as the principal trading partner, but the United States is still with military bases all around the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea and the East China Sea, and it still claims to control the so-called first island chain, which is a rather obnoxious concept that goes back to 1951, where the United States says we will deny China access to the Blue Ocean. Rather extraordinary hubris, an extraordinary idea that the United States should say whether China has access to the Pacific Ocean. But this is what is underway. So yes, there's a lot of drama. There's a lot of danger. There are a lot of views in Washington that I regard as delusional, delusions of continuing grandeur. And the United States is basically at war with the UN system, because the UN system is a legal system. It's a structure of rules. And the United States doesn't want to be constrained by any rules now, especially as it's flailing around trying to keep its power. Also, Trump is, of course, insanely jealous, especially of Russia, I would say, of its vast Arctic land and access to the Arctic Ocean. And so Trump is even openly claiming Canada as the 51st state, or Greenland as part of the United States. This has a lot to do with Trump's jealousy of the scale of Russia and the fact that Russia strategically has a geographic dominance in the Arctic region, not the United States. And so all of this leads to instability. If we had a normal, stable president and a rational government, we would be working to create a world in which all parts of the world can have their prosperity, in which there can be security, in which there can be arms control, in which actually we would be pushing the doomsday clock away from midnight, not towards midnight. But we don't have that kind of rational government right now.
Jeffrey, in the little time we have left, just about a minute, I want to talk about the future of NATO. And there were many who were saying that that future is now threatened by Trump's desire to acquire Greenland.
Basically, Europe should have its own foreign policy. If Europe were smart, which it's not in its foreign policy, it would be the first to seek diplomacy with Russia and with China, and not to be so Russophobic that they try to crawl back into the lap of the United States, which does not have Europe's best interests at heart. So Europe should get its act together. They don't really need NATO. They need diplomacy. They need peace and collective security with Russia. They need peace and trade with China. They, of course, need some military, but they're not about to be attacked if they would go to normal diplomacy. And in that way, Europe would find it's probably more threatened by the United States right now than it is by Russia if it could just take a very rational view of the current situation.
Jeffrey Sachs, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you.
This week, the European Union and India announced a landmark free trade agreement dubbed the mother of all deals. Statements by European leaders suggest that President Trump and his tariffs-based trade policy over the last year likely helped propel the two sides toward a final agreement. So how are countries dealing with the United States foreign policy? To discuss this, we welcome from Santiago, Chile, Ambassador Jorge Heine, who is a former Chilean ambassador to China and author of the book The Non-Aligned World. And from Johannesburg, South Africa, David Monyae is director of the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Ambassador Heine, President Trump has now resurrected what's known as the Monroe Doctrine. He's rechristened it, of course, the Monroe Doctrine. This is a centuries-old policy that dates back to the 1820s, warning Europe to keep out of the Western Hemisphere. But this time, of course, the warning goes to the whole world. And to reinforce that warning, President Trump has shown us what he's capable of doing. He's bombed boats in the Caribbean as well as the Pacific, killing people, accusing them of smuggling drugs without providing any evidence. And of course, in the biggest one of those incidents, he bombed Venezuela, used the US military to bomb Venezuela, killing 100 people, seizing the country's leader, and then seizing the country's oil. You know, when he talks about the Monroe Doctrine, does the US still have that kind of influence in Latin America?
Well, there's no doubt that the United States exercises an enormous amount of influence in Latin America. But the notion that somehow we can go back to 1823, which is when President James Monroe proclaimed the Monroe Doctrine, of course, is quite anachronistic. Latin America today interacts with the whole world. And therefore, the notion that so-called extra-regional or extra-hemispheric powers should be banned from, interacting with Latin American countries is really, out of place and very outlandish. But let me say the following. What I find extremely concerning is that the attack on Venezuela that took place on January 3rd is the first time in 200 years of inter-American relations that the United States is undertaking a military attack on the South American mainland. We have had quite a few of those attacks and invasions in Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean, but not on South America. In that sense, a threshold has been crossed, which is very dangerous. And both President Trump and Mr. Rubio, the Secretary of State, have indicated that, well, other countries might be next. And they have mentioned Mexico, they have mentioned Colombia, they mentioned Cuba. So we are here in very dangerous terrain.
Mm-hmm. Right. They have mentioned other countries, threatened other countries. Now, the president of Brazil, Lula da Silva, as well as the Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, they will be in Washington for talks with President Trump. What do you think they will hope to achieve? Will they try and redefine this relationship?
Well, it seems to me it is important while standing up to the United States, which is what President Lula and President Petro have done. At the same time, keep talking. Obviously, diplomacy is undertaken by talking to other leaders. And in the past, President Trump has shown signs that he is willing to listen to that. He obviously backed down from the 50% tariffs he imposed on Brazil after talking with President Lula. So I'm hopeful that his talks with President Petro will also lead to a softening on his stance on Colombia. I'm encouraged by these meetings.
David Monyae, President Trump has also been on something of a collision course with South Africa. He's made these completely baseless, unfounded accusations of a genocide against white people in South Africa. He's also threatened Pretoria's relationship with Iran. He boycotted the G20, which was hosted by South Africa not so long ago. How is South Africa responding to these threats in the short term, and does it have a strategy to deal with this kind of hostility from the United States in the longer term?
Indeed, South Africa has responded in so many ways. I think the very first view was to meet President Donald Trump by our President Ramaphosa. And the meeting somehow demonstrated the ability of South Africa to showcase and to prove that there is absolutely no genocide taking place. But far beyond that, I think South Africa has been calling upon all other nations to really come to the country and see for themselves. And indeed they did during the G20. The bulk of countries that were in South Africa made it clear that there's absolutely no genocide taking place. But far beyond that, South Africa still maintains its foreign policy, wants that foreign policy to be independent, the ability to continue having strong relationship with the United States and the rest of the Western world, and at the same time, reaching out to BRICS and others in a way of trying to reform the international order in a way that addresses some of the disparities among nations.
Now, South Africa is also facing the threat, David, of secondary sanctions. In fact, Trump has threatened to impose further tariffs on South Africa, as well as two other African countries, Kenya and Nigeria as well, because they continue to trade with Iran, because they continue to import oil from Iran. I mean, how serious is the threat? Is this threat to the energy security of these countries?
It's a huge threat, and we see most countries, including United States' closest allies in Europe, that most countries, including South Africa, have started to diversify their trade. There is a policy in South Africa called the butterfly strategy, which means opening trade with other nations and trying to rely less on the United States. And it seems to be working.
Yeah.
In the long run, I think it will be the United States that is going to lose. But going forward, I think we're going to see more of this aggression, particularly on smaller countries and bully. However, I think as the Canadian Prime Minister made it clear, this global rupture requires middle powers to somehow try to find ways of working together to mitigate and to negotiate between the bigger powers at the global level.
Ambassador Heine, you mentioned Cuba a moment ago, and of course Cuba used to get a great deal of its oil from Venezuela. Now, of course, that supply has been cut off after this bombing by the United States. Mexico also supplied Cuba with oil, but Mexico has now halted oil shipments to the island nation. What's behind this? Do you see a wider, more sinister motive in what the U.S. is doing?
Well, the motive is quite straightforward. Much as they wanted regime change in Venezuela, although they did not achieve that, what they achieved was leadership change. The regime, the Chavista regime, is still very much in place. They are now going after the Cuban regime, and they want regime change in Cuba. Now, in Cuba, what they are aiming to do is not something similar to what they did in Caracas, that is, say, bombing Havana, but rather they are going more for a medium-term strategy, and that is basically to asphyxiate the Cuban economy by denying it oil. The notion being that the sort of regime would collapse on its own. I'm not sure that would happen, but that is the strategy that is on the table right now.
David Monyae, South Africa has also been very vocal about what's happening in the Middle East right now, specifically what Israel is doing in Gaza. Trump came up with that board of peace, and now it's expanded to a global board of peace, which some see as an alternative to the United Nations. Is this, in the end, what the U.S. hostility is all about? The fact that South Africa was the one that took Israel to the International Court of Justice?
Indeed, I think that is precisely the main reason. I think what worries South Africa and other countries in the global south is that President Donald Trump is working outside the UN system and the legal system, and the kind of foreign policies pursuing in the Middle East and everywhere else tend to be transnational and very personal. And is money-driven. But as we all know, international relations is not all about money and money alone. There are a number of other factors that feed into the issue, and cooperation among countries to resolve peacefully conflicts such as one in Palestine requires United Nations, requires international law, and to see to it that justice is done. And as it stands, it appears that he's using other means, undermining that system, bringing more danger. As we move forward, I don't think we will have that post-1945 world order.
Okay, time has caught up with us. David Monyae, Ambassador Jorge Heine, thanks to both of you for being with us. And we need to leave it there. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.